All right, hello everybody. We are at Masechet Eruvin on Daf Lamed Gimel. This is, in terms of words, a short daf, but it's dense, a little bit dense. So bear with us. We'll try to get a good understanding of the whole without getting too much stuck in the weeds. Okay, so what we're going to see is a continuation of the discussion of the Mishnah. The Mishnah that we saw yesterday made a distinction regarding an Eruv. This is an Eruv Techumin, so I'm putting it somewhere outside of my city limits because I want to be able to walk farther. And a convenient place to put my Eruv is at a tree. So the Mishnah teaches that I must put the Eruv below 10 tefachim from the tree, the bottom 10 tefachim, and then it's a good eruv. However, if I place the eruv higher than 10 tefachim, then that is a problem. The eruv is no good. That seems to be a problem that above 10 tefachim is no longer considered the Shut Harabim. And so if I'm down below in the Shut Harabim, and my eruv is above 10 tefachim on a tree, if it's wide enough for tefachim, then that is a Reshut HaYachid. And so therefore, my eruv, my meal that I'm supposed to have access to, is in a different reshut and is not accessible to me on Shabbat. And the whole idea of the eruv techumin is that I am symbolically putting my place where my meal is, but that only works if the meal is in some way accessible. All right, so that's what the Mishnah said. And on the daf yesterday, Shemuel and as well as the sages from Israel analyzed this Mishnah. And they propose that the Mishnah only makes sense if we have these four okimtot, these four assumptions going in. That this case, a case in which it's not good if it's more than 10 tefachim, but it's okay if it's below 10 tefachim, that's a case where the tree is in the Shut Harabim, and the tree is 4 tefachim wide, and that's why therefore it's at a Shut HaYachid, within a Shut Harabim. And also when I intend to dwell at the base of the tree, and that's why, see, if I intended to dwell up in the tree, then that's okay. I could put my eruv up because I'm in the same place as it. But if I intend to dwell at the base and the eruv is high, then it's in a different reshut. And this does work when I'm putting it on the tree and it's below, even though there's a law, midrabanan, that you're not allowed to make use of a tree. You can't climb on a tree, you can't sit on a tree, you can't lean on a tree, you can't hang things or take things off of a tree on Shabbat. All that is midrabanan. And so therefore, even if it's below 10 tefachim on the bottom of the tree, that could still be a problem. However, we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says that during Ben Hashemashot, all midrabanans are allowed. And therefore, the eruv that I placed there, it takes effect during Ben Hashemashot. And so since during Ben Hashemashot, I'm allowed to use the tree, and I would have access, even though on Shabbat itself I cannot, that doesn't matter. All right, so we have all those assumptions in mind going in to this stuff, and what we're going to see is 3 more okimtot on this Mishnah to make it just a little bit more complicated. Rava is going to add 1, and Rabbi Yitzchak is going to add another 2 to this. Then after that, we will see they approve from a Braita regarding the bee. I just mentioned the bee permits doing a shivut, the Rabbanan laws during twilight, during Ben Hashemashot. We want to prove it from a Braita. That Braita that we quote, which is actually a parallel in the Tosefta here, mentions a case of a basket, putting my eruv in a basket that I put on the tree, hang from the tree. And so since the Braita mentioned that, we'll have spent some time discussing that tangent case. All right, so that's the table of contents for today, and now we can jump right into it. And we start here. Amar Rava, lo shanu ela be'ilan ha'omed chutz le'ibura shel ir, aval ilan ha'omed betoch ibura shel ir, afilu lema'ala me'asara, hare ze eruv, de mata keman de malya damya. So Rava is adding yet another okimta, that our Mishnah only makes sense if it's a tree that's outside the ibura shel ir, literally the pregnancy of the city. Ibur means pregnant. The rabbis use pregnancy as a metaphor for lots of different things. When you say shana me'obedet, a pregnant year, that refers to a year that has adar bet, because it's a little bit bigger than usual, right? Or a month that's pregnant is a month that has 30 days rather than 29 days. So too in a city. A city is defined, has borders, has walls, but for the purposes of Eruv Techumin, we have the outskirts of the city are also important. That is 70 2/3 amot. 70 2/3, we've seen that number before. That's the square root of 5,000. That an area on outside the city limits of 70 2/3 is still considered, for the purpose of Techumin, is still part of the city. This halakha will come up later when you're trying to square off a city and where do you start measuring the 2,000 amot from. But don't worry about that. The point for us is that that outskirt of the city, that belt around it, called the pregnancy of the city, we consider it as if keman demal damya. It's as if it's filled up to 4 amot. So the idea is that because the city has so many buildings and houses and walls and curbs, and so a lot of it is already built up, so to the area around it, we consider it as if it's 10 tefachim high, and therefore is all a reshut hayachid. Now, this is not technically a reshut hayachid for all matters. It doesn't mean that you can carry there. But for the purposes of Techum Shabbat, it is like a reshut hayachid. I don't know if you ever saw a tel, an archaeological dig, right? Cities are generally built on top of other cities, on top of other cities, and they do end up actually being higher than the area around them. So this kind of you can think of as the slope that's right around the city. Okay, so now how do we apply this? So Rabba's point is as follows. Let's say I have a tree that has all the other requirements that we just said. In other words, the assumptions that we already made, that's in public domain and all that. But here's the thing, it has to be in public domain. If a tree, and this is the type of tree where we're talking about, if this tree is within the boundaries of the city, within that belt, that's considered like it's in the Reshut HaYachid for the purposes of Eruv Techumin. And therefore, if I'm at the base of the tree, and we consider all of the ground to be 10 tefachim high, like it's a Reshut HaYachid, then I have no problem. Even if I put it high up, I can just climb up and get it. Because the law is, Reshut HaYachid extends up to heaven. Reshut HaRabim only extends up to 10 tefachim. So that's why we have this tree for this purpose of Mishnah, because the Mishnah says it's okay when it's below 10 tefachim, but it's not okay that's above 10 tefachim. That only makes sense when it's in the Reshut HaYachid, a public domain, where below 10 tefachim is the same area as I am. I'm in Reshut HaRabim. This is in Reshut HaRabim. I stand up and get it, and that won't be a problem. But in order for this to be prohibited above, this has to be a separate domain, and if it's within that belt around it, it's not yet a separate domain. Okay, so that's Rava's statement. Now we're going to add to that ihachi chutz libura shel ir nameh kevan de'amar Rava noten eruvo yesh lo 4 amot havya la reshut hayachid u'reshut hayachid ola ad larakia. So now we're saying, if you're considering this a kind of a lower level Reshut HaYachid, again, this is not that belt area is not a Reshut HaYachid for all purposes, only for the matter of Techumin. Well, we have another similar type of area, which is that Rava said that if, let's say, I go out in the middle of the desert and I place, I'm just sitting there. So the halakha is I have 4 amot around me. That is my personal Reshut HaYachid. So I can walk around in that area and carry around in that area, even out in the middle of nowhere. It's a personal Reshut HaYachid. So if you're considering this type of personal Reshut HaYachid as an actual Reshut HaYachid regarding my eruv, the meal that I'm placing there, well then anywhere the tree is, even way outside the city, right? Since I'll go back to my picture. Since I made my eruv here and I'm dwelling here, the 4 amot all around the tree is considered my personal Reshut HaYachid, and therefore the Reshut HaYachid goes up to heaven. And so even if I put the meal above, high up, I can still go up and access it. I can climb up, and during Ben Hashemashot, I'm allowed to climb a tree, according to the B, and so I can go up and access it. So therefore, the Mishnah, which did make a distinction and said above is not allowed, below is allowed, cannot be talking about a tree being anywhere, because even out in the middle of Reshut Harabim, I have personal space. So you see we have a problem here. So we're going to find a creative solution. Right, he said that. Right, and the Reshut Hachid Ola ad Larakia. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bered Rab Meshashia. Here's the solution. Hacha bilan hanoteh chutz l'arba amot askinan v'nitkaven lishbot beikaro. We're talking about a tree that has a long branch, and so this is the case that we are discussing. We have a tree here where I am at the base. Okay, so I am at the base down here, and I put the eruv. It's true, I have 4 amot. That's this yellow line that's around it. That is my space, and so that's a Reshut Hachid, and so I would able to go up to the heavens within that. But in this case, I put my eruv not within that area because the branch goes 4 amot out from the trunk of the tree, and in this case, if I put it below 10 tefachim, that's okay, but not if I put it above 10 tefachim. Why? Because below 10 tefachim is part of the Reshut Harabim. So I can simply, walk over there, I can grab it, and I can eat it, right? And I'm not transferring from one Reshut to the other because it's below 10 tefachim, it's all within the Reshut Harabim. However, if it's up here, then the Reshut Harabim extends up to here, and this is now a separate Reshut, and there's no way I can access it on Shabbat when it's up here. So that resolves that problem. Okay. A quick question about that. Wait a second. Umay lemala, umay lemata, mata, hadar zakef. If you're telling me that the tree is such a shape that it extends out 4 amot, so then right now I'm assuming it only extends horizontally. It's like a very flat but long tree. So when the Mishnah says above and below, where is it talking about above and below if it only extends horizontally? The answer is it extends vertically as well, as in this picture, extends horizontally out of 4 amot, and then it goes up vertically. So that way we have both above and below 10 tefachim, and all this is outside of my personal area of 4 amot. Okay, so we resolved that question as well. Now, one last question about that case. Hold on, even in that case, wouldn't I be able to access it or by the leaves and by the branches? In other words, because I do have my 4 amot here, which is like a Reshut Yachid, so I can climb up the tree. Again, you can't climb on a tree on Shabbat, but we're talking about since you could do it during twilight, which is when you need to access it. That's when the eruv goes into effect. And according to the B, you're allowed to do it Rabbanan during twilight. So I could climb up here on the tree, and then I can walk over, and I can access it that way, right? Let me see, yeah. Because, in other words, this is a 10 tefachim, it's true, but from here up, right, is still within my domain, and so I won't be transferring from one domain to the other since I'm allowed to walk up here. So can I do that? And therefore, even if it's above 10 tefachim, this should be permitted. That is the question, and the answer is כשרבים מחטפין עליו וחידאו לה. אמרו לה, עמוד 9 ברשות הרבים, ורבים מחטפין עליו, וזרק ונח על הגביו, חייב. Oh, we have to add yet another okimta. This is the last assumption, that this must be talking about a case where this tree happens to be in a convenient spot in the middle of a thoroughfare. And all during the week, people who are carrying burdens, they stop at this tree and they put their burdens down to take a rest and adjust it on their shoulder. And therefore, there's a general rule that something that is lower than 10 tefachim, if it's only 9 tefachim, right, then that's not considered a reshut at all. It's just like a fire hydrant or something. It's called makom patur. It's not even a reshut. And so therefore, on Shabbat, you're allowed to transfer from Reshut Harabim to that Makom Patur, because it's not, has no definition, or from Reshut Achid to that point. So this normally would be Makom Patur. However, Ulah's point is that if people use it regularly, the public uses it as an important place, then it becomes part of Reshut Harabim. And so the Mishnah, therefore, would make sense if we assume that this is furthermore such a place. And so although it's below 10 tefachim, still it's considered Reshut Harabim. And therefore, if I walk over there, then this is still the area of Reshut Harabim. And therefore, I would not be able to take this from an area above there and bring it back to me. And so we resolved all of those questions. And so to get back to our outline, now we had a Mishnah that we thought was pretty simple and straightforward. All the Mishnah said was, if you're putting your Eruvin in a tree, then you have to make it below 10 tefachim, not above 10 tefachim. But it's actually quite a complicated Mishnah. And both in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel came up with these 4 assumptions. It has to be in public domain, 4 tefachim wide. And I intend to be at the base of the tree. And we follow the B that Shavut is permitted before dark. And now the rabbis in Bavel add 3 more, that the tree has to be beyond 70 2/3 amot from outside the city limit. And Yitzchak adds that it has to be on a branch that's extending 4 amot from the trunk, and has to be that the public regularly rest their burdens on the branch. All that Mishnah doesn't say, but we are interpreting that the Mishnah must be talking about such a case. Okay, so that's the analysis of that Mishnah. Now we want to get back to this extremely important machloket, which is very important as for halacha l'maaseh, because even nowadays, not such a well-known halacha, but if you did forget to do something very important, even after sunset, let's say for the first few minutes after sunset, I don't know, 13 minutes or something, Rambam adds has to be for a devar mitzvah, then you are allowed to perform something that's asur midrabanan within that time period, because the rabbis did not make a gezerah during that time. This is subject of a machloket. The Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says it's okay. The Banan say it's not permitted. Halacha follows Rabbi. So you can go look this up in the Rambam in Shulchan Aruch, and it is permitted, but just be careful if you're actually applying it. Right? You have to really know the difference between the Rabbanan and don't make a habit out of it. Okay, but in any case, we want to find the source. Might be, might Rabbanan. Right? How do we know that there are sources that they actually say this? Because they don't say it explicitly. So now we're going to quote a Baraita. It does have a parallel in Tosefta. And you see it's very similar to the Mishnah, but it adds a little bit more. Titanya, Nitano Ba'ilan. I take my meal for an Eruv Techumin and I put it in a tree. Lemal Lemasara Tefachim and Eruvo Eruv. Above 10 Tefachim, it's no good, as the Mishnah said. Lemat Masara Tefachim, Eruvo Eruv. Basur Litelo. Below 10 Tefachim, as the Mishnah said, that's fine. By the way, you're not allowed to take it because you're using a tree, and you're not allowed to use a tree on Shabbat. Okay. Netano bechalkala utlao ba'ilan afilu lemala masara tevachim eruvo eruv divrei bi. Now a new case that we didn't have in the Mishnah. If I put it in a basket, I put my meal, I take my bread, I put it in a basket, and I hang the basket on the tree, then even above 10 tefachim, it is a good eruv. Now, we're going to have to think about this, right? What's the difference if I put it in a basket? But the problem was, if I put it above 10 tefachim, it's a separate shoot. I'm in a shoot Rabim. That's in a shoot Echid. So that would seem to be a problem. How come all of a sudden the basket magically makes it okay? All right, we're going to deal with that in just a few minutes. But just focus on this aspect of Rabbi. That's all the opinion of Rabbi. Chachamim omerim kol makom she'asur litelo and eruvo eruv. They have a general rule. If it's in a place that you cannot access it on Shabbat, then it is not in a good eruv. Okay, and this is a place that you can't access it because it's you put it on the tree, anywhere on the tree. So they would say even below 10 tefachim, it's no good. All right, that's the end of the Braita. Now we're going to analyze it. Chachamim omrim ahaya. When it says Chachamim disagree, which case do they disagree on? on the first case, where you put the meal itself on the tree, or the second case, where you put the basket on the tree. Where if it's talking about the second case of hanging it on the tree, see, hanging it on a basket on the tree is a little bit better than putting it on a branch of the tree, because in that case, I'm not using the top of the tree, but rather only the sides of it. More like, kind of leaning. I'm just taking a basket, I'm hanging it on something that's sticking out of the tree. So because of that, it's a little bit more indirect. There was a long discussion back in Masechet Shabbat on this very topic, and in that discussion there, they never quoted this baraita, even though this would be a major source. You'd want to know that Chachamim disagree. No, a branch is part of the tree. This is talking about something else that's sticking out from a nail, or something attached to the tree. So in that whole discussion back then, we didn't quote this baraita. So therefore, you see that nobody back there over there thought that Chachamim that the opinion of Chachamim is relevant here. So therefore, that cannot be that Chachamim are disagreeing regarding the basket case. All right, Chachamim would agree that the basket is okay. Rather, Chachamim must be disagreeing with the first case, with the main one. And so you cannot put it on a branch or on a tree that is even below 10 tefachim. So Ela Resha, that's what they're arguing on the Resha. Okay, this is the proof. Got it? Right, the point is as follows. Since Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that if I put it below 10 tefachim, it's okay, even though I'm not allowed to move it, right? Because that's the words he said. And these are words that are not in the Mishnah. The Baraita here is like adding these words as explanation. And he said, Ve'asur li tilo. So there you go. Even though I'm prohibited from taking it on Shabbat, it's still a good eruv. Well, we can ask why. You have to be able to access the eruv. That's the whole point. That's my place. This only makes sense if I can access it during Ben HaShemashot, because that's really all that's important. Once it gets dark, if an animal comes and eats it, or it just disappears, or goes up in fire, it doesn't matter. I don't need the eruv to actually be there the rest of Shabbat. It has to be there when it gets dark. And therefore, I have to access it during twilight, before Seta Kochavim, I have to be able to access it. And therefore, since the Rabbi says that the eruv below 10 tefachim is valid eruv, that means I can access it during Ben HaShemashot. And so therefore, that proves that just like in this case, you can take something you can use a tree during Ben HaShemashot, because that's the Rabbanan. Therefore, we derive that, according to the B, we are allowed to do any Rabbanan during Ben HaShemashot. Okay, good. So that proved it. And now we can go on to the next topic. The next topic is that within that Braita, you mentioned the case of a basket. Hold on, we just mentioned that case. We got to analyze, what is this basket talking about? Hi Ilan, hechidami. What are the circumstances of this tree? If the tree is less than 4 tefachim wide, then it's a makom patur, right? Reshut hayachid is defined as something that's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide. That's a reshut hayachid. If it's less than that, it's just a pole. It's makom patur. It's just nothing. And therefore, if I had a makom patur in the middle of a reshut harabim and I place my eruv there, it should be totally fine, because I can go, I can access it, I can take it. And if it does have 4 amot, it's a reshut hayachid. So I put my bread in a basket. I put the basket on top of this tree. That's 4 amot. That's a reshut hayachid. So that's no good. There's no way I can access it. And so therefore it should be prohibited. What does putting it in the basket help? Okay, this is a very strong question. All right, let's try to figure it out. Amar Ravina, Resha di'it be'arba'a, Sefa delet be'arba'a, V'chalkala mashlimato le'arba'a. We're talking about the beginning. The first case in the Mishnah was talking about where the tree, a regular tree that is wide 4 amot, and that's why I can't put it on top, 10 tefachim high. Good, that's as we said before. The Sefa is talking about a different kind of tree. It's a little tricky, right? That this tree is less than 4. But it's still relevant. It's still parallel to the first case, because the basket itself, when I put it next to the tree, actually fills it in to be 4 amot. So hopefully a picture will clarify this. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. We have a tree that's thin. I should have made this look thinner. So let's assume that there's only 3 tefachim, and now together with the basket, it will be 4 tefachim all together. Let's see if there's a or a picture like this, right? So that now altogether it is 4. So this is an interesting case because the eruv, or the basket itself, is making up the space, which is a little bit circular because the eruv is now in the reshut hayachid because the eruv makes up the space to be a reshut hayachid. But if it wasn't there at all, then it wouldn't be a reshut hayachid, right? So that's why this is a fun case. All right, so let's see how this resolves the question. Rabbi Sabala Kirabi Meir, this Sabala Kirabi Yehuda. Rabbi, who says that this case is okay, actually it seems that Rabbanan would also agree that this case is okay because this is on the side of the tree that it's hanging from. All right, but anyway, let's focus on the Rabbi now. This has to assume that he agrees with 2 opinions of Tanaim that are in the generation prior to him, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. We'll explain what each of them say. Sabala Rabbi Meir damar chokekin lehashlim. Rabbi Meir has a general rule in other cases that says we carve out to complete a space. The case where it's usually applied is if I have an archway, right? Do I have to put a mezuzah on an archway? This is very practical. It comes up a lot. Lots of people have arches in their homes. Well, the answer is basically yes. But he's talking about a particularly small archway. In order for something to be a doorway, to require mezuzah, it has to be 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide. Same definition as this. So if it's that big, that's fine. However, if it arches, then it's that big on the bottom, but not on top. Does that require a mezuzah? So the Rabbi Meir says, we imagine as if you squared off the arch. If you would square off the arch and knock out those bricks, would it be 4 by 10? If so, then you need an arch. So we can use our imagination to fill in or fill out a space. In this case, you're filling it out with air space. But if we apply the same rule here, we are doing something similar. He says, chokekin lashlim applied to this is, even though this here is only 3 tefachim, and this is 1, we can consider it as if it's all 1, and therefore it's a tree that has 4. And now we have the bread that I'm putting in here is on top of an area that is 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim high, and therefore is in fact like a reshut hayachid in this sense. Okay, so that's assumption number 1 of Rabbi. Now, if this was totally true, this would be a problem because if it's in the reshut hayachid, it's no good. That's a separate domain. And the Rabbi actually says it's permitted in this case. So let's see. Now he also agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. V'sabar like Rabbi Yehuda da'amar ba'aynan eruv al gabe mekom arba'a ve'leka. We also require that an eruv has to be resting on a place that is 4 by 4. And if you didn't have the basket, then it wouldn't be anywhere, right? So that would be a different problem. Let's see what Rabbi says in his original context. My Rabbi Yehuda detanya. Rabbi Yehuda omer naas kora b'reshut harabim v'iniach eruvo aleha gavoa asara urchaba asara eruvo eruv v'im lav and eruvo eruv. According to Rabbi Yehuda, I'll do the second case first. If I put a pole in the middle of b'reshut harabim and it's 10 tefachim high, but not for I'll start with the first case. And it is 4 tefachim wide. That's a good eruv. If not, it's not a good eruv. Now, what do you mean if it's not a good eruv? If it's less than 10 tefachim high, then it's down with me in the reshut harabim. So that should be fine. Rather, we'll clarify. El hachikamad gavoa asara sarich sheyeh berosha arba'a en gavoha asara en sarich sheyeh berosha arba'a. So here's all the cases according to the Yehuda. If it's 10 tefachim high, then it has to be 4 wide. Then it'll be a reshut yachid, and so it's in its own area as long as I'm there with it. If it's less than 10 tefachim, then it doesn't need to have 4 wide because that's just a small thing. a small pole that's in the Reshut Harabim with me. The problem will be if it is 10 tefachim high, but smaller than 4 tefachim. Because in that case, you see it goes higher than the Reshut Harabim. So it's no longer in the Reshut Harabim. But it's also on the small thing that's not a Reshut Hayachid. So therefore, it's in no man's land. And it's not a good eruv in such a case. So that's the law of the Yehuda. So now if we combine both of these, here's what we end up with. Let me get back to the picture to explain it better. Okay, so here, so the basket. Why is putting it on a basket above 10 tefachim any better than putting the food itself on a tree that's above 10 tefachim? The answer is, if I put the food on a tree by itself with no basket above 10 tefachim, then it's in the Reshut Hayachid. I can't access it. It's no good. But in this case, the basket itself is making up the area, and it's only considered a Reshut Hayachid because we are following the Bimeir that says Chokikin Lashlim. We make it as if the basket is part of it, and the basket being part of it is okay because now that it's 4 tefachim, it's at a shoot, and so it's in a good spot. But because we follow the B who says that if it was thinner, then it would not be in a good. It would not be a Reshut Hayachid, and therefore, since the basket is this area is only considered 4 tefachim on account of the basket, it's not really fully a Reshut Hayachid for all matters, and therefore it's kind of as if it's within my domain, right? So in other words, because it's this paradoxical case that the eruv itself is creating the area that makes it kosher, that's why this case is allowed, and not if it was not in a basket. All right, there's a lot more discussion and detail of exactly how this works, but hopefully that's clear. Okay, so that's the explanation of the B. And now one last comment on it. Kiman, does he agree with the following? The lo Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya seems that he disagrees with this. The Tanya Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer Naas kaneh b'reshut harabim v'niach berosho teraskal v'zarak v'nach al gabav hayav. Rabbi Yosef had talked about this case. If I have a thin pole, so obviously this is 10 tefachim high, but it's not 4 tefachim wide. So this would be makom patur by itself. But I took a basket that is 4 tefachim wide, and I put it on top. And so the top now is 4 tefachim wide. So is this considered a Reshut Hayachid? Well, he says, if I throw something from Reshut Harabim into the basket, I'm playing a little basketball. It's basketball. This is the origin of basketball right here. And if I get the shot in, then I'm chayav. All right, so you got the point, but you also have to bring a korban chatat, unfortunately. So he says this is chayav. So you see that he says that if it is on a pole, but the basket, even though the basket is what's making it space of 4 tefachim, it's still considered a full Reshut Hayachid. And therefore, the B couldn't possibly agree with this because the B says, I can put my eruv up there, right? Because it's a Reshut Hayachid just enough to make it viable, right? That it's a space, but not enough to make it a real Reshut Hayachid because I'm only using the basket to fill it in. So according to the B, this should be patur in this case, right? So you see that the B and the B would disagree. But we resolve that and say, no, they could agree. Afilu tema Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, hatam hadran mechisata, hacha la hadran mechisata. This Rabbi might agree with this case because it has walls all around, and there's a general rule that you can extend walls. And so in this case, we can imagine the walls extending down to the ground, and so this would be like a solid pole that's 4 tefachim all the way down. And so everyone would agree in this case that it's considered a Reshut Hayachid. And this is not the same as this case where it does not have walls all around, and therefore we would not extend it because it's just sticking out in one spot. And that's why in this case it would say it's not fully a Reshut Hayachid, it's only an area that is just big enough to just legal enough to permit putting my eruv there, but it's not a shut yachid, and therefore, in this case, it is permissible, and I can put my eruv in that spot. And so, with that, we conclude this staff and this discussion. So we have these 7 okim tot, and then this case. Just an interesting addendum is interestingly, the Yerushalmi does talk about these 4, but not these 3. And it's interesting because the second half of our daf, which is talking about this putting the basket on top of the tree, does not assume that the tree has to extend 4 amot out, right? It's just assuming that you're putting it right there. But according to this, if it's like right above where I am, then it shouldn't be a problem because it's within my 4 amot. So it looks like the second half of the daf is just sticking with the basic 4 okim tot, and does not yet assume this. So it's kind of like this probably these come in chronologically after the basket discussion. Is my guess. Also, the Baraita that we quote, which is from the Tosefta, if you actually read the Tosefta as we have it in the main manuscript, the best manuscript that we have, actually says that if you put the basket lemala masat tefachim and eruvo eruv, and below it is an eruv, and that's according to the B, which is not the same as the Baraita that we had. And you can see that according to this Tosefta, it would actually be a lot easier to explain this case. But because the Talmud Bavli has a different version of this Baraita, it had to go to great lengths to explain what the halacha is. But the benefit of that is that we got to learn all these different and interesting cases of a kind of circular definition that because the eruv itself makes up the space, therefore it is that case of a basket is permitted according to the B. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody.